Do you remember the sound of radiators coming to life in October? That symphony of clanks and hisses that meant winter had arrived? If you lived in a 1950s apartment, you remember a world that felt fundamentally different from the places we live today. Not just different, but alive in ways that modern apartments simply aren't. These weren't just places to sleep between work shifts. They were spaces with personality, with demands, with presence. If this is bringing back memories we're here to remember together, let's talk about 10 things that made these apartments feel like something we genuinely miss. Number 1, the walls had real weight, and you felt safer because of it. Knock on a modern apartment wall and you get that hollow drum sound that reminds you how thin everything is. Knock on a 1950s wall and you got a thud that said, "This building isn't going anywhere." Plaster over metal, lath over studs, sometimes with horsehair mixed in. These walls were 6 inches thick on the interior, 18 inches on the exterior. They didn't just separate spaces, they created genuine privacy. You could hear the building itself, the radiators clanking, the pipes singing, but your neighbor's television, their arguments, their private lives, that stayed private. And God, don't we miss that? The mass of these walls held temperature too. In summer, they stayed cool through midday heat. In winter, once warmed, they radiated heat back into the room for hours after the radiator shut off. The walls had thermal memory. They were working with you, not just standing there. Hit that subscribe button if you remember knocking on walls just to hear that solid sound. Number 2, the radiator was a relationship, not an appliance. A cast iron beast under your window had a personality, and you learned it the way you'd learn a roommate's habits. When the super fired up the boiler in October, your apartment got hot, sometimes too hot. So you opened a window in January, and you know what? That was fine. That was normal. You were in conversation with your heating system. Steam heat worked on building-wide cycles you couldn't control individually. The boiler created steam. It rose through pipes, condensed in your radiator, releasing its heat, then ran back down as water. You learned your radiator's moods. Some heated evenly and gently. Others got scalding on one end, lukewarm on the other. The knocking, that distinctive hammering sound, came from water trapped in pipes, turned to steam, banging against metal as it expanded. You could shim one end to help drainage. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. The radiator's paint was layers thick, applied over decades. You could barely see the original ornamental details buried under years of enamel. When it first came on each fall, it smelled like burnt dust mixed with metal, a scent that meant winter had officially arrived. People kept pots of water on radiators for humidity. The evaporation created a particular mineral smell that became part of home. Some kept plants on the wide windowsills above them, taking advantage of the rising heat. You were in dialogue with a heating system, adjusting windows and airflow to moderate what the building provided. And somehow, that negotiation felt more human than pressing buttons on a digital thermostat. Number 3, windows required muscle memory. Double-hung wood frames with sash weights hidden in the casings. You heard those weights move when you raised or lowered the window. The frames swelled in summer humidity, stuck tight. Opening them took both hands and determination. They contracted in winter, letting cold air seep through gaps. Single pane glass, no insulation value. Every window had a personality. This one stuck at 6 inches. That one wouldn't stay up without a stick cut to the right length. Every apartment had window sticks, usually a piece of broomstick stored behind furniture. You didn't call maintenance, you adapted. Number 4, the kitchen accepted its limitations. 5 cubic feet of refrigerator space, 4 gas burners with pilot lights that burned continuously. You could smell gas sometimes, just faintly. That was normal. The icebox, some people still called it that, even though ice delivery had stopped decades earlier. The door had a heavy latch that required a firm pull to open. Inside, the shelves were wire racks that left marks on anything soft. The freezer compartment was tiny, barely big enough for 2 ice cube trays and maybe a package of frozen vegetables. Frost built up quickly. Defrosting meant turning it off, putting pans underneath to catch the melt, and waiting. Cabinet space was minimal. Countertop space was precious. The oven dial showed temperatures, but you learned whether yours ran hot or cool. Cooking meant understanding your specific equipment. The refrigerator was loud when it cycled on, silent when it cycled off. You timed conversations around it. Storage was vertical, stacked, organized by necessity. You shopped more frequently because you couldn't buy for a week at once. The sink was usually porcelain with a drain board built in, no garbage disposal. Food scraps went in the trash, which went down the incinerator chute in the hallway. Number 5, Bathrooms were built like bomb shelters, and they lasted like it too. White subway tiles, floor to ceiling. Not for Instagram, for actual waterproofing that would survive decades. That grout darkened over years, no matter how much you scrubbed. And you know what? It gave the room character. The bathtub was cast iron with porcelain enamel, deep enough to actually submerge in up to your chin. It weighed 300 pounds empty and sat on ornate cast feet that served absolutely no functional purpose, except that's how bathtubs were made. And it looked permanent, because it was permanent. The sink had separate hot and cold taps, because mixer valves weren't standard yet. You either washed in cold or scalding, or you filled the sink and mixed the temperature yourself. It was inconvenient. It was also simple, repairable, and lasted 50 years without replacement. The medicine cabinet was recessed into the wall, metal with a mirror door. The shelves inside were glass with rust spots where water had seeped in over decades. Every apartment's medicine cabinet had those same rust spots. It was proof of time passing, of life lived. If you're recognizing your own apartment in these details, leave a comment. Tell us what you remember most clearly about the sounds, the specific quirks you had to learn. Number 6, the building had a superintendent who actually knew your name. He lived there, usually in a basement apartment near the boiler room. This wasn't just his job, it was his home too. He knew every pipe, every radiator, every stuck window in every unit. When something broke, you didn't call a 1-800 number and wait 3 days for a contractor who'd never been to your building before. You knocked on his door. He came up with tools that actually fit the building's aging fixtures because he'd been working on them for 15 or 20 years. He remembered when the previous tenants lived in your unit. He remembered when you moved in. This created something modern buildings have lost completely, institutional memory. The building had a living history embodied in one person who understood all its systems and cared about keeping them running because this was his home too. When he finally retired or passed away, people mourned not just the person, but the loss of everything he knew about the building that couldn't be written down. Number 7, sound was constant and intimate. The refrigerator motor cycling on with its distinctive hum. Radiators clanking on their schedule, pipes singing when someone 3 floors up turned on a tap. Footsteps from upstairs, not clear enough to identify who, but enough to know someone was home. Someone was living their life above you. Doors slamming sent percussion through the building's frame that you felt in your chest. The building settled with temperature changes. Wood floors expanded in summer, contracted in winter, creating groans and creaks that had nothing to do with anyone walking. Windows rattled in wind. But here's the beautiful part. Voices and televisions stayed private behind those thick walls. You heard building sounds, mechanical and structural, the infrastructure of shared living, not the intimate details of other people's lives. There was privacy where it mattered, community where it was needed. Number 8, common spaces forced interaction. You couldn't get to your apartment without passing through the lobby. Mailboxes were there, arranged in rows with brass locks and small glass windows. Checking mail meant being visible. You could see who got letters, who got packages too big for the box that the mailman left with the super. The lobby floor was marble, or terrazzo, worn smooth along the traffic path from door to stairs. It echoed with footsteps. You learned to identify neighbors by their walk. The stairs themselves were another shared space. Cast iron railings, wooden steps with rubber treads, tacked on for traction. The risers creaked on certain steps, the same ones every time. The laundry room in the basement created its own social structure. Machines took 45 minutes per wash cycle. Too long to go upstairs, too short to go far. So you waited. And waiting meant talking. You saw the same neighbors on the same days, established informal schedules. Someone was always there when you carried your basket down. There were rules, mostly unwritten. Don't leave your clothes unattended. Clean the lint trap. If you reserved a machine, you better show up on time. The front stoop became the building's living room in summer. People sat on the steps, watched the street, talked. Children played under collective watch. The building's design made community unavoidable. Number 9, electrical systems were beautifully simple. 1 overhead fixture per room, 1 or 2 outlets. Extension cords were standard equipment, not a workaround. You planned furniture around outlet locations the way modern people plan around TV placement. Running a television, radio, and lamp from the same outlet was common, accomplished with adapters that turned one socket into 3 or 4 connections. No dedicated circuits for air conditioning because that wasn't standard yet. You worked within the building's electrical capacity and somehow that was enough. Number 10, everything showed age without apology. Paint flaked, Plaster developed hairline cracks. Wooden floors wore down along traffic paths, showing decades of footsteps in the grain. Brass hardware had a patina that no polishing could remove. Window ropes frayed and broke. Faucets dripped. The super fixed what he could, but some problems were built into aging infrastructure. A perfectly silent, perfectly functioning system was theoretical, not reality. But this visible aging created a sense of time. The building had been there before you and would be after you left. The marble in the lobby was worn smooth by decades of footsteps. You were temporary. The building was permanent. Here's what people miss without quite naming it. Those inconveniences created engagement. You couldn't just set a thermostat and forget about temperature. You opened windows, closed them, adjusted to the building's heating cycle. You put a pot of water on the radiator when the air got dry. You learned where drafts came from and stuffed towels under doors. The apartment required attention. It responded to weather, to seasons. You were in dialogue with your living space. The social fabric was different, too. You couldn't avoid neighbors. The design forced interaction at mailboxes and laundries, on stoops. You knew who lived around you, not necessarily as friends, but as familiar presences. The widow on the third floor who collected mail at exactly 4 p.m. The young couple on the second floor with the new baby you heard crying at night. The old man who sat on the stoop every evening after dinner. The building was community by physical necessity. You were aware of the life happening around you because the building made it impossible not to be. The ceilings were higher too, 10 feet or more. Not for luxury, for ventilation. Before air conditioning became standard, that extra height meant the difference between bearable and unbearable in summer. Heat rose, and in a 10-foot room, it rose above where you lived and worked. The volume of air was nearly double what you get in a modern apartment with the same floor space. This affected how rooms felt, how sound moved, how light fell from windows. A room with a 10-foot ceiling has different proportions, different shadows, different acoustics than an 8-foot ceiling. Modern apartments offer real improvements. Individual climate control, insulated windows, in-unit laundry. These matter. But we lost something too. Modern construction created uniformity. Apartments in Seattle look identical to Miami. Regional character engineered out. The social fabric changed more. You can live years without knowing neighbors. Package delivery to units, in-unit laundry eliminate spaces where community happened. Modern design optimizes for privacy, not community. Radiators that clanked weren't better because they were difficult. They were part of a different relationship with space, one requiring engagement, not passive comfort. When your radiator knocked, you paid attention. You were aware of the building, seasons, neighbors. Drop a comment with your memories. What floor? What sounds, smells, light? Not events, but daily texture in your specific apartment. These details matter. They're how we lived when America assumed buildings lasted centuries. Neighbors knew each other. Inconvenience was acceptable, with durability and community. That world exists in fragments now. But the complete experience exists primarily in memory, and recognizing what we've lost might help us think more carefully about what we're building.